So I released a song in 2011 called Read All About It, which tackled, for me it was a really personal song. It was about the suicide of my father. So that song came from a really painful place, and after the success of that song, I was asked by Radio 1 if I'd do an audio documentary on suicide and mental health issues, and the response to that was phenomenal. Which is great, you know, it was well received, but the sad thing is the reason it was so well received is because so many people related to what was spoken about. So it was a little bit bittersweet, much in the same way that the TV documentary Suicide of Me that followed was.
Were you surprised by the outpouring of requests to talk, to consider, to be part of this idea?
Yeah, especially in the industry that I'm in, because there's so much bravado. You know, we're all performers. We all have a face that we put on, however real we are as artists or whatever, or claim to be. You know, we definitely all do put a face on, and we have to, because people don't want to know about the trouble behind the scenes when they come and see you at a show. They just want to get a good performance. And the surprise for me, the biggest one, was just how many people in the industry that I'm in came up to me and said, that documentary really, really touched me, and I've been suffering with this, or I've been suffering with that. It's commonplace everywhere. The BBC came back after seeing the first rushes and said, the story that we feel is the strongest here is yours. We want you to explore your father's suicide more. And it was really, really difficult for me to say yes to that, because that wasn't what I signed up for, and I wasn't totally sure I was ready to do that. Despite, you know, in my own head up until that point thinking that I'd dealt with it and I'd processed it, became quite apparent quite quickly that I hadn't. And when we started to do things, and I spoke to family who I hadn't been in contact with for a long time, and I had conversations with my grandmother who brought me up, and weirdly, you know, it was the first time I'd ever had that conversation with my nan, who had brought me up, who I'd lived with until I was 19. So for 19 years, we never had that conversation. I cried several times, which to me, you know, expresses vulnerability. And I didn't really want people to see me in a way that I don't often see myself. Not to say that I'm hard. I think there's a strong misconception, you know, people mistake strong for hard. Mm-hmm. You know, with all that I've been through, I must at some point have been strong, otherwise I wouldn't still be here. But I'm not hard, I'm quite gentle. But that said, I wasn't totally comfortable with people seeing me in that way. And when I started to think about it, I was like, well, that's the problem, isn't it? I'm scared. So the vulnerability isn't in the genuine vulnerability. The vulnerability is in the fear of people seeing me in that way. Why shouldn't you know, if you can see me happy, why shouldn't you be able to see me, you know, see me sad?
And it's interesting, isn't it? Because keeping it real is one of those phrases that I think has come from the music industry.
If you strip it back, like I think coming from where I come from in Clapton, a lot of people think being real is selling drugs, it is doing whatever else you do that goes with that. It's being masculine, whatever that means, which I guess is what we're here to try and work out and uncover. But actually, just being real is just being honest with yourself and with everyone else. So it's being however you are and however you feel each day, which is often different. I think there's a lot of rap artists who do pour their hearts out, and the artists that I have an affinity towards, you know, Biggie was one of my favorite rappers, and for as much bravado and flamboyance as there was a real honesty to his music. And the more honest the artist, the more I kind of identified with them, and the more I enjoyed their music. I think rap music gets a really, really hard time in the press because people focus on the bits which they can make look bad rather than the stuff which actually helps people coming from a situation to feel better about the situation that they're in.
Walking away from situations, not disclosing, not talking, not sharing, the isolation eventually is hard to come back from.
I think isolation is a huge problem, but it is quite insular, and I think that's why it's important for people to be outspoken. And I think if you've got a stage where you can use your voice for more than just your own benefit, then you should, because it makes people realize that actually they're not the only ones going through it. And I think a lot of the time when you do go through things like that, and it's kind of selfish, isn't it? You know what I mean? Oh, this is just me. You know, it is a little bit, and and I'm not saying that suicide is a selfish act, because I don't believe it is, but it's that whole, this is just me, I'm the only one going through this. But it manifests. The more you hold on to something, the bigger the burden it becomes, and it becomes, it's self-perpetuating. It just fuels itself then, and it becomes something so much more than it is.
Why do you think boys in particular are taught not to show their feelings?
I was brought up by my grandmother, and I think it exists especially in single-parent families. I think a lot of the time, from people that I've spoken to and what I've learned, that people, mothers will try and keep a kind of guard up, because if there's no father figure there to give any, and this is where it starts to come undone, right? So the father figure isn't there, so they want to be harder on their child because they think that that's what the man would do.
Would have done, yeah.
So then that child doesn't understand sensitivity, has a lot of emotions, but can't communicate them even to his mother. What kind of problems is that going to cause?
Do you think that at school they need more support to talk about how boys could be, not just this sort of old-fashioned idea of you've got to be superior, you've got to be hard, you've got to be tough?
Otherwise we're setting them up to fail, I think, because the world that we live in now is, there's stress everywhere. And I don't think men, especially, as emotionally developed as they should be, or as able to handle those stresses, because we're not willing to go, I am stressed. It's just, I'll just go and have a pint and pretend everything's all right.
Getting affirmation from your dad as a man is possibly the most important thing of all. Do you think that's true? Bearing in mind there are so few roles that dads are given.
Yeah, I think it probably is, because I know how damaged I am from, and this is what the weird thing is that my situation was actually both of what you just said, although I actually had a connection with my dad, but he was in and out of my life. He wasn't a constant presence, and that was where the big problem come from. It probably drove me to be the child that I was. I was very bright academically. I had a lot of options, which I never took, probably because I didn't have a stern hand there. My grandmother sympathised with my situation, so my only problem was attendance. I took a lot of time off school, and because of that, I ended up leaving school at 13, ended up in a PRU, eventually got back into school for year 10, but had missed so much school that I couldn't get my coursework done in time to sit my exams, so I missed out on all of that. But the reason that when I was at school I worked so hard, and in everything that I've done I've worked so hard, is because we all search for validation, and some of us go the right way about it, some of us go the wrong way about getting attention. But I guess the reason that I worked so hard when I was a kid was because I did want that validation, and I wanted that affirmation that I didn't get from my dad. And it's quite difficult, because you think, like, growing up in a house of women, how do I know what it is to be a man? I had my nan telling me to walk away from any confrontation, and then I started to feel, I didn't feel like much. Even though I was a boy, I didn't feel like much of a man walking away from things. So then when I didn't, I would overreact. My response would be disproportionate. And there are situations which I wouldn't have had all of those insecurities about had I have had someone showing me what it was to be a man, whatever that actually is. It's difficult, I'm lucky. I've got a really good circle of friends, but it's only in the last few years really that we've started telling each other we love each other. That would have been something that just didn't happen. It'd always be, yeah, cool, bro, wicked, yeah. But now when we leave each other, we give each other a hug and it's like, I love you, brother, I like proper. But it's taken a long time to get to a place where even that feels comfortable, and it can still feel weird sometimes. I think it's a generational thing.
Do you?
Yeah, I do. I don't think it's going to change overnight, but I think we keep the conversation open, and we use the platforms that we have to make people feel more okay about showing emotion. Rappers, everyone assumes we're all hard. There's always been this misconception of me, like me being hard, because I got tattoos, and I grew up where I did, and I used to sell drugs, and I had a Staffordshire Bull Terrier, and I've been stabbed. I didn't stab someone, I got stabbed. How does that make me hard? I don't think any of those things make me hard. I think there is a real misconception, but that will carry on for as long as people project an image which one isn't sustainable or isn't actually honest.
Yeah.
That being said, though, some people are less emotional. Some people are. And sometimes in some situations, you do just need to be told to pull yourself together, because it's not as severe as other things. Sometimes you do just need to be reminded that you are capable, you are competent, and you can do what you need to do, so do it.